My name is Clifford, and I'm 55 years old. Last month, I thought I was heading to my son's 16th birthday party as his proud father. I'd worked overtime for 3 months to buy him that Trek mountain bike he'd been dreaming about. I was so excited to see Marcus open that gift, to see his face light up like it used to when he was little. But instead of celebration that day, became the moment I realized my own son saw me as nothing more than his mother's ex-husband. What happened next changed both our lives forever, and honestly, I'm still processing whether I made the right choice. Before I tell you what happened that day, I want to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe, because this story will show you how sometimes the people closest to us can break our hearts in ways we never imagined. Now let me take you back to that birthday party that changed everything. You have to understand the history to grasp why that birthday hit me so hard. Sarah and I divorced 3 years ago, after 15 years of marriage. I won't lie to you, it was my fault in many ways. I was consumed by work, spending 12-hour days managing the construction of a 40-story downtown building project. Sarah felt neglected, said I chose concrete and steel over family dinners and school plays. She wasn't wrong, but I thought I was building our future, securing Marcus's college fund, giving them a life I never had, growing up poor in Alabama. The divorce was relatively amicable. We agreed Marcus would live with Sarah during the week, and I'd have him every weekend and half the holidays. It seemed fair at the time. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly Sarah would move on. Within a year, she was dating Brad Thompson, some marketing executive who drove a BMW and had perfect teeth. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony I wasn't invited to, which stung more than I expected. Despite everything, Marcus and I maintained our bond. He was my mini-me growing up, always wanting to tag along to construction sites, asking a million questions about cranes and foundations. We had this ritual where every Saturday morning we'd drive out to Lake Morrison and fish until sunset, talking about everything from school drama to his dreams of becoming an engineer like his old man. Even after the divorce, he'd call me every night before bed, sharing stories about his day, his friends, his latest crush. I was so proud of this kid. Marcus made honor roll consistently, played varsity soccer, and had this kindness that reminded me of my own father. He'd volunteer at the animal shelter without being asked, always stood up for the underdog at school. During our weekend visits, he'd help me work on home improvement projects, and we'd order pizza and watch old action movies until we fell asleep on the couch. Those moments felt sacred to me, proof that divorce hadn't broken what mattered most. When Marcus mentioned wanting that specific Trek mountain bike, a top-of-the-line model that cost nearly $2,000, I didn't hesitate. I picked up extra weekend shifts, skipped meals out, and even sold my old fishing boat to make it happen. This wasn't just a gift, it was my way of showing him that no matter what changes happened in our family structure, his dreams still mattered to me. I spent weeks researching the exact model, the right size, even had it customized with his name engraved on the frame. The night before his birthday, Marcus called me as usual. His voice bubbled with excitement about the party Sarah and Brad were throwing. He mentioned how many friends were coming, how they'd rented tables and a DJ, how the whole family would be there to celebrate. When he said family, my heart warmed because I assumed that included me. I pictured myself there, part of the celebration, watching my son, surrounded by love and joy. I had no idea I was walking into an ambush. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather, the kind of crisp October day that makes you grateful to be alive. I loaded the bike into my truck, taking extra care to protect the pristine paint job and shiny components. The drive to Sarah's house in the Maple Grove subdivision took 20 minutes, giving me time to imagine Marcus's reaction. Would he scream with excitement like he used to? When he was little, would he hug me tight and call me the best dad ever? These fantasies kept me smiling until I turned onto Elm Street and saw the chaos ahead. Cars lined both sides of the street. Not just a few vehicles, but dozens of them, including several I didn't recognize, and a few that made my chest tighten. I recognized the Hendersons' Subaru, the Patels from down the block, even Sarah's sister, Jennifer's Honda. But there were also cars that screamed money luxury vehicles that made my 10-year-old pickup truck look shabby by comparison. I parked 3 blocks away and walked back the bike's weight, awkward in my arms, as neighbors I once knew stared from their driveways. Brad answered the front door instead of Marcus, which immediately set me on edge. He wore khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. His smile was polite but cold, the kind service industry workers give difficult customers. "Clifford, good to see you," he said, taking the bike without asking and immediately examining it like he was appraising its value. "Marcus is in the back with his friends. Big crowd today." There was something in his tone, a subtle ownership, that made me feel like I was delivering a package rather than attending my son's celebration. Walking through the house I once called home felt surreal. Sarah had redecorated, completely erasing any trace of my 15-year presence. The walls that once held our family photos now displayed professional portraits of her, Brad and Marcus looking like a magazine advertisement for suburban happiness. The furniture was newer, more expensive, coordinated in ways our mismatched pieces never were. Even the smell was different, some fancy candle scent instead of the coffee and sawdust aroma I remembered. The backyard had been transformed into party central. Sarah and Brad had rented professional tables with white linens, hired a DJ, who was playing current music I didn't recognize, and set up a dessert station that looked like something from a wedding reception. Dozens of teenagers clustered around the pool area, while adults gathered near a fully stocked bar. The whole setup probably cost more than I made in 2 months, and I couldn't help feeling like I was crashing someone else's event. I spotted Marcus immediately surrounded by his soccer teammates near the pool. He looked older, somehow more confident, wearing designer clothes I knew I hadn't bought him. When he saw me, he waved casually but didn't break away from his group. No running over with excitement, no immediate hug. Just a polite acknowledgement, like I was any other guest. This wasn't the enthusiastic greeting I'd imagined during my drive over, and something cold settled in my stomach as I realized how much had changed in just a few months. Standing alone with a beer I didn't really want. I became an observer at my own son's party. What I saw made my chest tighten with each passing minute. Marcus wasn't just comfortable with Brad, he was genuinely affectionate with him. They had inside jokes, shared glances, casual touches on the shoulder that spoke of daily familiarity. When Brad made some comment about Marcus's soccer skills, my son beamed with pride in a way that used to be reserved for me. Mrs. Henderson, our former neighbor, approached with her usual gossipy enthusiasm. "Clifford, so good to see you," she chirped, though her eyes held that mixture of pity and curiosity. People get around divorce casualties. "Marcus has grown so much this year. You must be so proud of what Brad's done for him." The comment hit me wrong, implying that Brad deserved credit for my son's development. When I tried to steer the conversation toward my own involvement in Marcus's life, she nodded politely, but kept circling back to Brad's influence, his steady presence, his positive impact on the family dynamic. A woman I didn't recognize, apparently one of Sarah's new friends, joined our conversation and made things worse. She gushed about how complete the family seemed, now how Marcus was thriving in this stable environment, how lucky he was to have found such a wonderful father figure. Each word felt like a small blade cutting away at my identity as Marcus's dad. These people weren't being malicious, but their casual erasure of my role in my son's life was devastating in its thoughtless totality. The gift-opening ceremony approached, and I positioned myself near the present table with anticipation mixed with dread. Marcus had already opened several expensive items, his reactions polite but not particularly enthusiastic. When he reached my carefully wrapped mountain bike, I held my breath. He tore away the paper, and for a moment his face lit up with genuine surprise and excitement. "Wow, this is incredible," he said, running his hands over the frame. My heart soared for exactly 15 seconds. That's when Brad stepped forward with his trademark smile and dropped his bombshell. "That's really generous, Clifford, but Marcus already has the bike I got him last month." He gestured toward the garage, where I could now see another mountain bike, clearly newer and more expensive than mine, hanging from professional storage hooks. Marcus's enthusiasm evaporated as he looked between the two bikes, clearly embarrassed by the redundancy. "Thanks, Dad," he said to me, but the word sounded forced, obligatory, like he was following a script he'd outgrown. The rest of the gift opening blurred together as I processed this revelation. Brad hadn't just bought Marcus a bike, he'd bought him a better bike earlier, without any coordination or consideration for what I might be planning. This wasn't accidental. This was systematic replacement, and I was apparently too disconnected from my son's daily life to have seen it coming. I stood there, holding my beer, watching my carefully planned gesture become an awkward footnote to someone else's superior generosity. The afternoon wore on with a series of increasingly painful observations. When Marcus's soccer coach arrived and congratulated the family on Marcus's recent achievements, he specifically thanked Brad for his support at games and practices. Apparently, Brad had become a regular presence at sporting events I didn't even know about. When had this transition happened? Why hadn't Marcus mentioned that Brad was attending his games? I felt like I was discovering a parallel version of my son's life where I'd been systematically edited out. Sarah eventually approached me near the dessert table, her expression mixing guilt with defensive justification. We made small talk about Marcus's grades and college prospects, but the conversation quickly turned uncomfortable when she started praising Brad's involvement in Marcus's education. "He's been so helpful with homework," she said, apparently oblivious to how this might sound to Marcus's actual father. "And he handles the parent-teacher conferences so well. Marcus really responds to male authority figures." The implication was clear. I'd been an absent father, and Brad was filling a void I'd created through my own neglect. "Brad has been wonderful for Marcus," Sarah continued, warming to her theme. "He's teaching him responsibility, showing him what a real partnership looks like. Marcus is learning what it means to be a man from someone who's actually present every day." Each word was chosen carefully designed to highlight my failures while elevating Brad's virtues. When I tried to defend myself, mentioning our weekend activities and regular phone calls, Sarah's expression grew patronizing. "Weekend visits are nice, Clifford, but children need consistency. They need someone who's there for homework, help for late-night talks, for all the little moments that matter. Marcus has found that stability now. He's moved on, and honestly, it might be healthier if you accepted that." The conversation felt like a custody hearing where I was losing ground with every word. As the party continued, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was watching my son's life through glass, present, but somehow separate from everything that mattered. When Marcus's friends asked about his family, he pointed out Sarah and Brad without hesitation, mentioning me only when directly asked, and then with a kind of detached politeness that broke something inside me. I wasn't his dad anymore, in any meaningful sense. I was becoming a historical footnote, a weekend obligation, a source of awkward, redundant gifts. The worst part was Marcus's obvious comfort with this new reality. He wasn't conflicted or torn between two father figures. He'd made his choice clearly and definitively, and that choice wasn't me. Watching him laugh at Brad's jokes, seek Brad's approval. Include Brad naturally in conversations where I stood invisible at the margins, I realized that all my weekend visits and phone calls had been nostalgic maintenance of a relationship that had already fundamentally shifted. The moment that destroyed everything started so innocuously. I almost missed it. Marcus had finished eating cake and was standing with a group of his soccer teammates near the pool, animated and confident in a way that reminded me of myself at that age. I was across the patio nursing my third beer and counting minutes until I could politely leave when I heard him start making introductions as more friends arrived. "This is my mom, Sarah, and this is Brad, my real dad," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the yard with the casual confidence of absolute truth. The words hit me like a physical blow, but he wasn't finished. "And that's Clifford over there, my mom's ex-husband." He pointed in my direction with the same tone someone might use to identify a piece of furniture or a distant relative visiting for the holidays. The group of teenagers looked over at me with mild curiosity, the kind of polite attention you give someone's boring uncle. A few even smiled and waved completely unaware that they'd just witnessed a public execution. Marcus continued talking, explaining something about his birthday plans, but I couldn't hear the words over the rushing sound in my ears. My own son had just introduced me as his mother's ex-husband to his friends. Not his father, not even his biological father. His mother's ex-husband. Time seemed to slow as the full impact settled over me. 15 years of bedtime stories. Saturday morning, fishing trips, scraped knee band-aids, homework, help-proud moments at school plays and soccer games, all reduced to a legal footnote in someone else's family story. I stood there with my beer growing warm in my hand, watching Marcus continue his conversation without any awareness of what he'd just done to me. The worst part was how natural it sounded coming from his mouth. This wasn't a slip of the tongue or a moment of teenage rebellion. This was his authentic understanding of our relationship. Somewhere along the way, without any formal conversation or conscious decision, I had been demoted from father to footnote, and my son was comfortable enough with this change to announce it publicly at his own birthday party. I felt Brad's eyes on me from across the patio, and when I looked over, he was wearing what could only be described as a satisfied smile. Not malicious exactly, but definitely pleased with this public confirmation of his victory in whatever competition I hadn't realized we were having. Sarah was deep in conversation with another parent and hadn't heard the introduction, but several other adults had, and their expressions ranged from embarrassment to pity as they glanced between Marcus and me. The rational part of my brain understood that 16-year-olds sometimes say thoughtless things, that this could be a moment of poor judgment rather than a reflection of Marcus's true feelings. But the wounded father in me heard only rejection, only the casual dismissal of everything I'd tried to be for him since the day he was born. I'd been replaced publicly and definitively by a man who'd known my son for barely 2 years. Something crystallized in that moment, a clarity born from pain and humiliation that cut through every excuse I'd been making for months of gradual distancing. I walked directly over to where Marcus stood with his friends. My movements deliberate and probably more intense than the situation called for, but I was beyond caring about social niceties or birthday party etiquette. "Marcus," I said, my voice carrying enough edge that his friends immediately sensed tension and began backing away. "What did you just say?" He looked up at me with genuine confusion, clearly not understanding why I was upset. The innocence in his expression somehow made everything worse, confirming that his words hadn't been calculated cruelty, but rather honest reflection of how he saw our relationship. "I just introduced everyone, Dad. Clifford." The correction was automatic, and the ease with which he switched from Dad to my first name told me everything I needed to know about how complete this transformation had been. He wasn't even struggling with the change anymore. I had become Clifford to him formally, and finally. Brad materialized beside us with the smooth intervention of someone accustomed to managing difficult situations. "Maybe we should talk about this later in private." He suggested, his tone reasonable and measured in a way that made my emotional reaction look unstable by comparison. But Marcus wasn't finished destroying me. "Brad has been more of a father to me anyway," he said, not with malice, but with the matter-of-fact certainty that only teenagers can manage when they think they understand the world completely. "He helps with my homework every night, comes to all my games, talks to my teachers. He's actually here." The emphasis on "actually" was unintentional, but devastating, highlighting my absence by praising Brad's presence. The small crowd that had gathered was trying to pretend they weren't witnessing a family meltdown, but I could feel their eyes and hear their whispered conversations starting up around us. Marcus looked genuinely puzzled by my reaction, as if he couldn't understand why I'd be hurt by his honest assessment of our relationship. In his mind, he was simply stating facts, not delivering a killing blow to his father's heart. I looked at this young man I'd loved more than my own life. This person I'd worked overtime to support, worried about, been proud of, planned my entire future around, and realized he saw me as an obligation at best. Every weekend visit, every phone call, every gift had been dutiful maintenance of a relationship he'd already outgrown emotionally. I was clinging to something that no longer existed, except in my own nostalgic imagination. "If that's how you feel, son," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "then I guess there's nothing left for me here." The word "son" felt strange coming out of my mouth now, like calling someone by the wrong name. I turned and walked toward the gate, leaving behind the party, the redundant bicycle, and apparently the last remnants of my relationship with Marcus. Behind me I heard Sarah calling my name, but her voice sounded distant and obligatory. Marcus said, "Clifford, wait," in a tone that suggested mild concern rather than genuine distress. I didn't turn around. There was nothing left to say, and any attempt to explain or argue would only make me look more pathetic in front of all these people who had just witnessed my son replace me with mathematical precision. The drive home passed in a blur of anger, hurt, and surprisingly clarity. By the time I reached my apartment, I knew exactly what I was going to do. This wasn't a decision made in hot-blooded emotion, though emotion certainly fueled it. This was the logical conclusion of accepting what Marcus had told me. Brad was his real father now, and I was just his mother's ex-husband. My first call was to my attorney, Frank Morrison, who'd handled the divorce. "Frank, I need to make some changes to my support arrangements," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "I want to eliminate all voluntary contributions immediately." We spent an hour going through the details. I was legally obligated to pay child support until Marcus turned 18, but everything else had been voluntary generosity. The college fund contributions, the monthly allowance, the insurance policy that named him as beneficiary, the plans for helping with his first car. Frank tried to talk me through it, suggesting I might want to cool down before making permanent decisions. Clifford teenage kids say stupid things all the time. This might blow over. But I wasn't interested in cooling down. I was interested in accepting reality. Marcus had made his choice about who his real father was, so his real father could handle the real responsibilities that came with that title. Next, I called the bank and stopped the automatic transfers to Marcus's college account. Then I contacted my insurance agent and changed my life insurance beneficiary from Marcus to the Children's Hospital, where I'd started volunteering. I cancelled the vacation to Yellowstone we'd planned for later that summer and used the refund to pay down my credit cards. Each action felt like surgery, painful but necessary. The hardest part was composing the text message that would officially end our relationship as I'd known it. I rewrote it 12 times before settling on something brief and final. Since Brad is your real dad now, I'll let him handle your real responsibilities. Good luck with your future. I included a copy of the email I'd sent Sarah outlining the financial changes, then blocked Marcus's number before I could lose my nerve. That night, sitting in my empty apartment with takeout Chinese food and a beer, I felt something I hadn't expected relief. For months, I'd been trying to maintain a relationship that existed more in my memory than in current reality. I'd been the one calling, the one planning activities, the one working overtime to afford gifts that were redundant to what Brad was already providing. I'd been fighting to remain relevant in my son's life while he'd already moved on without me. The apartment was quiet in a way it hadn't been since the divorce. No anticipation of weekend visits, no phone calls to look forward to, no birthday or Christmas shopping to plan. Just silence and the freedom that comes from accepting an ending instead of fighting it. Marcus wanted Brad to be his father, fine. Now Brad could prove himself with college tuition, car payments, and wedding expenses. I was done competing for a position someone else had already claimed. The consequences started showing up faster than I'd expected. Marcus apparently spent the first week telling everyone I was throwing a tantrum and would get over it soon. Brad and Sarah seemed to have convinced him that my reaction was temporary drama, that I'd come crawling back within a month like some scorned ex-boyfriend rather than a father who'd been publicly dismissed by his own child. But the second week brought reality in the form of missing money. Marcus had grown accustomed to the $500 that appeared in his account every month, money I'd been sending beyond the court-ordered child support to help with gas entertainment and the general expenses of teenage life. When that didn't show up, Sarah called Frank's office instead of me, directly, apparently hoping to handle this through legal channels rather than personal conversation. By the third week, Marcus was calling my blocked number repeatedly, though I only knew this because Frank told me Sarah was claiming harassment and threatening legal action. "Kids trying to reach you," Frank said during one of our conversations. "Might want to consider whether you're ready for complete radio silence." But I wasn't ready to hear whatever justification or half apology Marcus might offer. Words were cheap, and I'd already heard his real feelings expressed clearly at that birthday party. The real wake-up call came when Marcus started researching colleges and discovered the account I'd been funding had been frozen and transferred. Apparently, Brad's promises about paying for Marcus's education had been vague assurances rather than concrete financial planning. Sarah called Frank in a panic when they realized the college fund they'd been counting on was no longer available and no equivalent fund existed in Brad's name. During the fourth week, Marcus showed up at my construction site downtown, somehow having convinced someone to tell him my work location, despite my instructions to the contrary. The security guard called up to my trailer to ask whether I wanted to see him, and I said no without hesitation. Through my window, I watched my son argue with security for 20 minutes before finally leaving looking smaller and younger than he had at his birthday party. The guilt hit me harder than I'd expected, watching him walk away with his shoulders slumped. This was still my child, regardless of what he'd said or how he'd hurt me. But the rational part of my brain reminded me that actions have consequences, and Marcus needed to learn that words matter. He'd chosen Brad as his real father in front of all his friends and family. Now he could live with that choice and all its implications. Jennifer Sarah's sister called me directly the following weekend, bypassing Frank and all the legal channels. "Clifford, this is getting ridiculous," she said without preamble. "He's a 16-year-old kid who said something stupid. You're destroying your relationship with your son over teenage thoughtlessness." But that's where she was wrong. I wasn't destroying anything. Marcus had already destroyed it when he decided I was his mother's ex-husband instead of his father. I was just acknowledging reality instead of pretending otherwise. 6 months have passed since Marcus's birthday party, and I can honestly say I've found a kind of peace I didn't expect. The first few months were brutal, I won't lie. There were nights when I'd catch myself reaching for the phone to call him, mornings when I'd wake up thinking about our Saturday fishing plans before remembering there wouldn't be any more Saturday fishing plans. But something beautiful happened when I stopped defining myself solely as Marcus's father. I started volunteering at the children's hospital, reading to kids who were fighting battles that made family drama seem trivial. These children, many of them without any parents at all, showed me gratitude for simple kindness that my own son had never expressed. I began to understand that love isn't always returned, and that's okay. Love is what you give, not what you get back. My work took on new meaning, too. Instead of every project being about building Marcus's future, I could focus on the craft itself, on creating something lasting and beautiful, without needing it to serve as proof of my worth as a father. I took on more challenging assignments, traveled to job sites in other states, expanded my skills in ways I'd been too focused to explore when every decision was filtered through its impact on weekend visitation schedules. The hardest part was learning to forgive myself for the years of absence that had created space for Brad to fill. Sarah wasn't entirely wrong when she'd criticized my workaholism. I had chosen work over family dinners, over time, over school plays, financial security, over present moment connection. My intentions were good, but my priorities were skewed, and Marcus had paid the price for my misguided definition of fatherly responsibility. But I also learned that being a good father doesn't mean accepting disrespect or public humiliation from your children. Real love sometimes requires boundaries, even painful ones. If Marcus truly saw Brad as his father, then Brad needed to step up and handle the full weight of that responsibility, not just the fun parts like birthday parties and soccer games, but the financial sacrifices and long-term commitments that real fathers make without recognition or gratitude. 3 months ago, I heard through Jennifer that Marcus and Brad were having problems. Apparently, the reality of paying for a 16-year-old's expenses was more challenging than Brad had anticipated. College applications were approaching, and the family was discovering that marketing executive salaries don't stretch as far as construction management income when it comes to out-of-state tuition. Marcus was reportedly asking questions about where his college fund had gone and why his real father wasn't helping with his future. I felt a twinge of satisfaction at this news, followed immediately by sadness. Not satisfaction at Marcus's struggles, but validation that my contributions had been real and meaningful, even if they'd been taken for granted. The sadness came from knowing that our relationship was probably broken beyond repair, that too much hurt and pride stood between us now for any easy reconciliation. Last month, Marcus turned 17. I didn't send a gift or a card. I didn't call or text. For the first time in 17 years, his birthday passed without any acknowledgement from me, and that absence felt both cruel and necessary. He'd wanted Brad to be his real father, so Brad could handle the birthday celebrations and gift obligations. I'd learned to let go of expectations and outcomes I couldn't control. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone learn from their own choices. Sometimes being a real father means having enough self-respect to walk away when your child decides you're expendable. I gave Marcus the freedom to choose his father, and he chose Brad. Now he gets to live with that choice and all its consequences, financial and otherwise. Real fathers don't compete for love through gifts and grand gestures. They earn respect through consistency, sacrifice, and unconditional support, even when that support goes unrecognized. I did that for 16 years, and Marcus decided it wasn't enough. That's his choice to make, and mine to accept. Today I'm building a hospital addition that will serve sick children for the next 50 years. Tonight I'll read stories to kids who appreciate 15 minutes of attention from a stranger, more than my own son appreciated 16 years of devotion from his father. Tomorrow, I'll wake up knowing that my worth isn't determined by whether Marcus ever realizes what he lost that day at his birthday party. I hope someday he'll understand what real love looks like, what real fathers actually do, and what he gave up when he chose convenience over loyalty. Maybe not. But I've learned that my job was to love him unconditionally, not to ensure that love was returned or appreciated. That's a lesson I hope you never have to learn the hard way. But if you do remember that your value as a parent isn't determined by your child's ability to recognize it. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to set boundaries with your own children when they crossed lines that hurt too deeply to ignore? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family relationships and the difficult choices we all face. Share this with someone who might need to hear that sometimes loving someone means having the strength to let them go. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you appreciate the people in your life who love you unconditionally, even when you don't realize how lucky you are to have them.